May 1900. The righteous and harmonious fists, or the Boxers, are roaming the countryside near Peking, known today as Beijing, hunting Christians and foreigners. But what was the Boxer Rebellion?
So, the Boxer Rebellion was a period in Chinese history where really we saw an opposition to all the foreign influence that occurred there. You see, these Boxers were Chinese citizens who opposed the activities of Christian missionaries and the currently ruling Qing dynasty, and all they wanted was to, in their view, take back China.
The Boxers were a society of anti-foreign, anti-Christian Chinese nationalists who caused violent acts in the Shandong province of China.
So Boxer was a name given to these revolutionaries by Westerners for them being known to do calisthenics and martial arts. But what they call themselves was the Yi Quan, which means the righteous and harmonious fists.
Oh, hi there. My ancestors were a very deeply spiritual people, and they were very connected to their culture. In fact, they had rites where they would call upon their ancestral spirits to come into them and give them strength, to make them immune to all weapons. And in fact, I wrote this book about it.
Droughts and floods plagued the Shandong province in 1897 to 1898. Many Chinese believed heaven and the gods were punishing them for allowing foreign influence. November 1st, 1897. 30 armed Boxers break into a Catholic mission compound, killing 2 German missionaries in the process. In October of 1898, a band of Boxers attacked a Christian village of Liyuntun, where a former Chinese temple had been converted into a Catholic church. Chinese hostilities towards Westerners goes as far back as the Opium Wars, which was even a cause for the Boxer Rebellion.
The Boxers, specifically the Chinese, had poor relations with the British in the past, with the Opium Wars, where us superior British folk we were selling the Chinese opium, which they would smoke, and the Chinese government did not like this, because a lot of the people became addicted, including government officials. And the Boxers were also not happy, because our merchants and missionaries were immune to their silly Chinese laws.
Oh, hey again. You see, one of the biggest curses upon my ancestors was opium. And so, in an effort to connect with them and to share their pain, I've prepared some here. Let's take a try. It's so unjust what they suffer.
The Boxers also began taking their anger out on the Qing dynasty government. They originally blamed the Imperial Chinese government for allowing Westerners into China. On October 18, 1899, Boxers fought Qing troops at the Battle of Senlu Temple. Both sustained casualties, however the Qing government won in the end. From June 11th to September 21st, 1898, the 100 Days Reform was in effect, which was put in place by the Emperor Zhongzhu. The reform failed, and the emperor was overthrown by conservative opponents led by the emperor's own aunt, Empress Dowager Cixi.
An interesting figure was the Empress Dowager Cixi, and she at first was against the Boxer regime because they wished to overthrow her, but later on she had joined them against the Western powers. And on June 13th, she ordered her troops to block all Western forces. And then on June 18th, she ordered all foreigners to be killed. And she was really cool. I have some concept art I made of her, of my impressions of her, if you want to see them.
The Empress Dowager Cixi was originally opposed to the Boxers, however changed her opinion of them and began to support them. This caused outrage from the foreign powers. The Empress was known for being a strict and powerful leader, even quoted saying,
"Whoever makes me unhappy for a day, I will make suffer for a lifetime."
In May of 1900, the Boxers were now around the countryside of Beijing, and on May 30th, British Minister Claudia Maxwell MacDonald requested for soldiers to defend the legations in Beijing. The next day, 400 soldiers from 8 countries took a train from Tianjin to Beijing and defended the legations. These 8 nations would soon form the 8 Nations Alliance, an alliance composed of Germany, Britain, Russia, the United States, Italy, Austria-Hungary, Japan, and France. On June 5th, the Boxers cut the rail line from Tianjin to Beijing. Beijing was now isolated. And on June 13th, a Japanese diplomat was killed by Boxers. German Minister Clemens von Kettler had then captured a Boxer and executed him. Thousands of Boxers then stormed Beijing and retaliated by burning churches and cathedrals. A second international force, the Seymour Expedition, led by British Vice Admiral Edward Seymour, left Tianjin with around 2,000 foreign soldiers towards Beijing. Prince Duan, a supporter of the Boxers, was angered by this and ordered imperial troops to attack the foreign army. The Seymour expedition soon realized the rail line to Beijing had been cut by the Boxers, and they were soon surrounded by Boxers and imperial soldiers. They tried to keep pushing to Beijing, but fell back due to firm resistance from the Boxers and imperial army. Then on June 17th, foreign powers took the Dagu forts. These forts were controlled by the Imperial Chinese government. On June 19th, word got out to the Empress that the Dagu forts had been attacked by the 8-Nation Alliance. She then demanded all foreign diplomats to leave Beijing under Chinese escort. The diplomats and legations refused. On June 20th, Clemens von Kettler was killed by a Chinese officer. Then, on June 21st, the Empress Dowager Cixi declares war on all foreign nations. The Chinese army and the Boxers then began to besiege Beijing. A second expedition, the Gasselee expedition, then captured Tianjin on July 14th. The leader of this expedition was British Lieutenant General Alfred Gasselee. He was now in charge of the 8-Nation Alliance, whose numbers were between 49,000 to 55,000 men. On August 5th, 20,000 men then were marched from Tianjin to Beijing.
So, I think we're gonna get to take it. Oh, Jesus!
On August 5th, 1900, the 8-Nations Alliance fought the Imperial Army at the Battle of Baikang, where they were then victorious. After being defeated at Baikang, the Chinese army then retreated to Yankun. There, the 8-Nations Alliance fought the Chinese again, defeating them for a second time. On August 14th, the 8-Nations Alliance finally made their way to Beijing. They were successful in defeating the Boxers and the Imperial Chinese, and they are also successful in freeing the over 900 foreigners that had been besieged in Beijing since June 20th.
After we broke the siege, the Empress and her Boxer buddies fled the city, and then we looted the city down to the bone. The Empress would not return to the city until 1901, where she negotiated her surrender.
After the Eight Nations Alliance defeated the Boxers and the Imperial Chinese at Beijing, the Boxers became less of a threat. Finally, on September 7th of 1901, the Chinese surrendered, and the Boxer Protocol was written. Certain Boxer leaders and supporters were executed, and the Qing dynasty was forced to pay reparations to the Eight Nations Alliance. During the war, Russia was successful in violently taking Manchuria away from the Chinese and claiming it for their own. The defeat of the Chinese crippled the Chinese monarchy, as in 1912, a successful revolution overthrew the Chinese monarchy, the Qing dynasty. In the end, the foreign powers had won, and the Chinese were forced into a humiliating defeat.